Okay, try to wrap your head around this for a second. A single project that ropes in over 150 countries. A plan to build brand new airports, highways, and seaports, basically trying to create the next Dubai or Singapore from scratch. This was the vision for China's Belt and Road Initiative, a project designed to literally redraw the map of global trade. But what happens when a dream that big starts to fall apart? Let's get into it.
You know, when this whole thing kicked off, it was being called the project of the century. I mean, the hype was massive. But today, a lot of people are using very different words, like geopolitical disaster. That original dream of shared prosperity has, for a whole lot of countries, curdled into a nightmare of debt.
So, what went wrong? How did a plan that was supposed to connect the world end up putting so many economies in a chokehold? Well, that's the big question we're here to unpack.
All right, so let's rewind. Let's go back to the beginning, because the original vision for the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, was, well, it was breathtaking.
Picture this, it's 2013, and President Xi Jinping gets on stage and unveils this incredible plan. A modern-day Silk Road, with railways, highways, and ports connecting entire continents, and the world was absolutely captivated. I mean, it makes sense, right? For decades, developing nations had been desperate for funding for huge projects, and Western banks just weren't interested. So when China came along with over $1 trillion in loans, they were stepping into a massive void.
But as that river of money started to flow, well, a different story began to surface. Critics started asking some pretty pointed questions, like, is this really about development for everyone, or is there something else going on here?
And this is where it gets really fascinating. Publicly, the BRI was all about cooperation, helping poor nations grow, all that good stuff. But the alleged reality? Something else entirely. See, China had a huge domestic issue. Way too much steel, too much cement, and too many construction companies with nothing to do. Critics argue the BRI was the perfect solution, a way to export all that excess capacity, give their own companies work, and at the same time expand China's political power and lock down access to raw materials all over the planet.
And this is what led to that really loaded term you hear all the time, debt trap diplomacy. The idea is simple, but it's pretty devastating. It's the accusation that you're purposely lending a country so much money that there is absolutely no way they can ever pay it back.
And here's the alleged playbook broken down. Step 1, you offer these huge, irresistible loans for shiny new projects. Step 2, you insist that Chinese companies have to be the ones to build everything, often using Chinese labor. And then step 3, the final move, when the country can't pay back the loan, which was kind of the point, you get to seize the asset, the port, the railway. It's yours.
And look, this wasn't just some abstract theory people were worried about. It really started happening. Across the globe, these grand promises began to crumble, leaving behind this trail of debt and massive disappointment.
Let's talk about the poster child for this whole mess, Sri Lanka. They were sold this incredible dream about the Hambantota port. It was going to be the next Dubai. But the reality? The port was a ghost town. It completely failed to attract business. In fact, early studies had already warned it wasn't needed. In 1 year, fewer than 40 ships docked there. And what did Sri Lanka get for all this? A $1.3 billion bill they couldn't pay.
And what was the consequence for not paying that bill? Sri Lanka was forced to hand over control of its own strategic port to a Chinese state-owned company. Not for a year, not for 10 years, but on a 99-year lease. They effectively lost a piece of their own sovereignty for a century.
But here's the thing, Sri Lanka wasn't a one-off. You see this pattern again and again. In Zambia, Chinese loans pushed the country into default. In Montenegro, they spent $1 billion on what's literally called a road to nowhere, just 41 kilometers of it, and their national debt just exploded. Then you've got Ecuador, where a Chinese-built dam is so poorly constructed it has over 17,000 cracks and is at risk of collapse. Just one disaster after another.
And the story just gets more absurd. Right next to that empty port in Sri Lanka, they also used a $200 million Chinese loan to build an international airport. Today, it's known as the world's emptiest airport. It's so deserted that wild animals have literally been spotted just wandering around on the runways.
And how about Pakistan's Gwadar port? It was supposed to be the crown jewel of their partnership with China. Well, just look at how the revenue was split. A staggering 91% goes to China. Pakistan, the country where the port actually is, gets a measly 9%. The numbers kind of speak for themselves, don't they?
So as more and more of these stories came out,
The world started to wise up. Countries that had welcomed the BRI with open arms were suddenly having very serious second thoughts.
You had countries like Malaysia, Myanmar, and Nepal hitting the brakes, either canceling projects outright or demanding much better terms. But the biggest symbolic blow, the one that really made headlines, came in 2023. Italy, the only major G7 economy to ever join, pulled out. They flat out called it a big mistake that brought them almost no benefit.
And seeing all this chaos, Western powers saw an opening. The US and Europe rolled out their own competing infrastructure programs. And their pitch was pretty direct. We can offer you a better, more transparent deal without all the hidden strings that China attaches. So after a decade of controversy, trillions of dollars spent, and this long trail of broken projects, what is the real legacy of the Belt and Road Initiative? And what does its future even look like?
For China itself, it's complicated. On the one hand, their global reputation has been seriously damaged by this whole debt trap thing, and they're now stuck with trillions in bad loans. But on the other hand, they got a lot of what they wanted. They secured stakes in over 100 ports worldwide, they've strengthened alliances with countries like Russia, and they've laid the foundation for a global network that covers nearly 2/3 of the world's population.
Recognizing the brand is toxic, China is now trying to rebrand. They're talking about a BRI 2.0, a new version that's supposed to be focused on smaller, more sustainable, green projects like digital infrastructure.
Which, of course, leaves us with the billion-dollar question. Is BRI 2.0 a real change in strategy, a genuine move toward more responsible investment? Or is it just the same old playbook of debt and dependency, wrapped up in a new, prettier package? The whole world is watching to find out, but this time, you can bet they're being a lot more careful.